The Gulfstream G650's cabin hummed with the quiet efficiency of 37,000 feet, its leather seats cradling passengers who measured their worth in market caps rather than heartbeats. In seat 12A, Valentina Viper Kozlova sipped champagne that cost more than most people's monthly rent, her fingers dancing across a tablet displaying stock portfolios that would make nations envious. The irony wasn't lost on her. 12 years ago, she'd been dodging surface-to-air missiles over the Hindu Kush in an F-16 that smelled of JP-8 fuel and fear. Now, she owned the defense contractors that built those same missiles. The transformation had been methodical. MIT for aerospace engineering after her military discharge, 3 patents in avionics systems, a startup that revolutionized drone navigation, sold to Boeing for $800 million. Each success had built upon the next, creating an empire founded on the very technology she'd once trusted with her life. The financial world knew her as the reclusive billionaire who'd cornered the military tech market. They had no idea she'd once been Viper 6, the pilot who'd flown 93 combat missions without losing a single wingman. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Morrison." The intercom crackled to life, breaking her concentration. Something in his voice made her look up from quarterly projections. 30 years of reading stress patterns in radio communications had taught her to hear what wasn't being said. "We're experiencing a slight deviation from our flight path due to air traffic control requests." The cabin attendant's smile faltered for exactly 0.7 seconds. Viper had trained herself to notice microexpressions during hostile negotiations. Through the oval window, she spotted the shadow before anyone else did. An F-22 Raptor, its angular stealth profile unmistakable even at distance, maintaining perfect formation with their civilian aircraft. Its presence meant only one thing: this wasn't air traffic control. Her fingers instinctively moved to her wrist, where a titanium bracelet bore the coordinates of her last combat mission. The muscle memory was immediate: threat assessment, escape routes, weapons availability. But there were no weapons at 37,000 feet in a business jet, only questions. The Raptor's pilot would be young, probably cocky, definitely unaware that the woman in 12A had once outmaneuvered 3 MiGs over contested airspace using nothing but instinct and prayer. Captain Morrison's voice returned, strained now. "We've been instructed to divert to Nellie's Air Force Base for an emergency consultation. I'm told we have someone aboard with specific expertise the military requires immediately." Viper's champagne suddenly tasted like copper. In the reflection of her tablet screen, she saw the woman she'd become. Designer suit, diamond earrings, manicured nails that had never touched a control stick. But beneath the surface, calloused hands remembered the weight of a flight helmet, and brown eyes that had tracked enemy aircraft across foreign skies now calculated angles of approach for an entirely different kind of mission. The other passengers murmured nervously, their biggest worry whether this delay would affect their dinner reservations. None of them noticed the woman in 12A checking her watch with the precision of someone who'd once synchronized bombing runs. None of them realized that their fellow passenger was running through emergency procedures that had nothing to do with stock options and everything to do with staying alive. The Raptor banked slightly, its pilot's helmet visible in the cockpit. Viper wondered if he knew he was escorting a ghost back to the world she tried to leave behind. The Nevada desert stretched endlessly below them, its harsh beauty familiar as an old scar. Nellie's Air Force Base materialized through the heat haze, its runways precisely parallel lines cutting through beige wasteland. Viper had landed here before, but never in a Gulfstream filled with hedge fund managers and tech moguls. The irony of her return wasn't lost. She'd left the military to build an empire, only to be summoned back like some reluctant consultant. As the landing gear extended with mechanical precision, she caught the reflection of her face in the window. The scar above her left eyebrow, barely visible under expertly applied concealer, had come from ejecting over Afghanistan when her F-16's engine had taken shrapnel from a lucky Taliban RPG. Wall Street had assumed it was from a skiing accident in Aspen. She'd never corrected them. The Gulfstream touched down with barely a bump, its pilots executing a textbook landing despite the unusual circumstances. Through the windows, Viper could see military vehicles surrounding the aircraft, Humvees with mounted .50 caliber machine guns, personnel in desert camouflage, and one figure standing apart from the rest. Even at distance, she recognized the bearing of a full colonel. His uniform was crisp despite the desert heat, his stance conveying authority earned through years of command decisions that meant life or death for the men and women under his supervision. The other passengers were growing increasingly agitated. A pharmaceutical executive in 8B was already on his satellite phone, presumably calling lawyers. The venture capitalist in 15D kept checking his Rolex as if time itself had betrayed him. They existed in a world where money solved problems and influence opened doors. None of them understood that they just entered a realm where neither commodity held much value. Captain Morrison appeared in the cabin doorway, his face pale beneath his tan. "Ms. Kozlova, there's a Colonel Patterson requesting to speak with you immediately." His voice carried the weight of someone delivering news he didn't fully understand. "The other passengers will remain aboard while you consult." The cabin fell silent. Viper felt their stares like laser designators painting her for targeting. These people knew her as the reclusive tech mogul who'd revolutionized military contracting. They had no idea she'd once been the pilot who tested those same systems under enemy fire, or that her innovations came from knowing exactly where existing technology failed when someone was trying to kill you. She stood slowly, her movements carrying a precision that civilian training couldn't teach. The Hermes briefcase in her hand contained contracts worth hundreds of millions, but she found herself thinking about the flight bag she'd once carried. Maps marked with ingress and egress routes, spare gloves, energy bars, and photographs of targets that needed to be eliminated before they could kill American soldiers. The aircraft door opened with a soft hiss, and desert heat rushed in like opening an oven. The temperature differential made her squint, but not as much as the sight of Colonel Patterson's face. He was younger than she'd expected, probably early 40s, with the kind of weathered features that came from deployments in harsh climates. But it was his eyes that made her pause. They held the weight of someone who'd made decisions that haunted him. "Ms. Kozlova," his voice carried respect mixed with urgency, "thank you for coming." She almost laughed at the phrasing, as if she'd had a choice. Colonel Patterson's handshake was firm but brief, the grip of someone accustomed to formality but pressed for time. "Ma'am, I apologize for the dramatic circumstances, but we have a situation that requires your specific expertise." His eyes scanned her designer outfit with what might have been amusement under different circumstances. "I understand you prefer the corporate world these days, but right now, we need Viper 6. The call sign hit her like a physical blow. She'd buried that identity under layers of success and respectability, but hearing it spoken aloud brought back everything. The pre-dawn briefings, the adrenaline spike of missile lock warnings, the absolute silence of a cockpit at altitude when death was measured in milliseconds of reaction time. Her civilian mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something harder underneath. "That was a long time ago, Colonel." Her voice remained steady, but her fingers unconsciously traced the titanium bracelet on her wrist. "I design weapons systems now. I don't use them." Patterson gestured toward a waiting Humvee, its engine running and doors open. 18 hours ago, a Chinese J-20 stealth fighter violated South Korean airspace and disappeared. Our satellites tracked it for exactly 4 minutes before losing contact. Radar stations across 3 countries have gone dark. Whatever took out that aircraft used technology we don't understand." He paused, studying her face. "Technology that matches specifications from patents filed by your company 3 years ago." The accusation hung between them like cordite smoke. Viper's mind raced through possibilities. each more disturbing than the last. Her innovations in stealth detection had been theoretical, mathematical models designed to give American forces an edge against next-generation threats. If someone had weaponized her research without authorization, the implications extended far beyond corporate espionage. "My systems are theoretical," she said carefully. "The power requirements alone would need a facility the size of—" She stopped, understanding flooding her expression. Patterson's grim nod confirmed her worst fears. "The size of a military installation. Yes, ma'am. Someone built your theoretical system, and they used it to disappear one of China's most advanced fighters along with its pilot." He opened the Humvee's passenger door. "Beijing is blamming us. They've moved 3 carrier groups toward the Taiwan Strait. The president has 12 hours to provide an explanation before they consider this an act of war." Viper looked back at the Gulf Stream, where faces pressed against windows watching this conversation unfold. Those people lived in a world where problems had solutions and crises had exit strategies. The world she was being pulled back into operated on different principles, where failure meant body counts and success was often measured in how many people didn't die. The desert wind tugged at her hair, carrying the scent of jet fuel and heated tarmac. It smelled exactly like every military base she'd ever known, a combination of purpose and machinery that spoke to something deep in her bones. Despite everything she'd built, despite the fortune that had bought her freedom from this life, she felt the familiar tightening in her chest that meant mission parameters were about to be established. Colonel Patterson waited beside the open door, not pushing but making his urgency clear through posture alone. Around them, airmen went about their duties with the focused efficiency of people who understood that someone's decision in the next few hours might determine whether they went home to their families or found themselves implementing contingency plans for global conflict. The weight of choice settled on her shoulders like a flight harness. She climbed into the Humvee without another word, leaving the world of stock portfolios and board meetings behind. The vehicle's interior smelled of canvas and cleaning solvent, achingly familiar sensations that brought back muscle memory she'd thought was buried. As they drove across the tarmac toward a complex of buildings that looked like they'd been designed by people who understood that function mattered more than form, Patterson handed her a tablet displaying satellite imagery that made her blood run cold. This was taken 6 hours ago over the Yellow Sea. The image showed empty ocean, but the data overlay told a different story. Electromagnetic signatures that shouldn't exist, radar returns from nothing, and temperature anomalies that suggested something massive moving through water without displacing it. Whatever took out that J-20 is mobile, invisible to conventional detection, and apparently capable of sustained underwater operation. Viper studied the data with the same intensity she'd once brought to target analysis. The patterns were familiar, too familiar. "These signatures match my theoretical models for adaptive camouflage systems, but the power output." She looked up from the tablet. "Colonel, the energy requirements for this would need a nuclear reactor. We're not talking about a weapon system. We're talking about a vessel." The Humvee stopped outside a nondescript building, marked only with numbers that meant nothing to civilians, but everything to people with appropriate clearance. Patterson's identification badge opened doors that led to corridors lined with secure communications equipment and personnel who moved with the urgency of people managing multiple crises simultaneously. The building hummed with the electricity of a command center operating at full capacity. "The Situation Room is this way, ma'am." Patterson's use of military courtesy felt natural despite her civilian clothes. "The Joint Chiefs are conferencing in from the Pentagon, and we have direct communication with Pacific Fleet Command. I should warn you, some of the people in that room aren't going to be happy about bringing in a civilian contractor, regardless of your background." They paused outside a door marked with security warnings in multiple languages. Through the small window, Viper could see officers gathered around displays showing global positioning systems, threat assessments, and communications feeds from units she recognized from her active duty years. The familiar choreography of military decision-making was playing out in real time, each person contributing specialized knowledge to solve a problem that could reshape the balance of power in the Pacific. "Before we go in," Patterson said quietly, "I need to know if you're prepared to see this through. Once you walk into that room, you're not a contractor or consultant. You're part of the solution, and that might mean making choices that your corporate board wouldn't understand." Viper's reflection in the door's window showed a woman caught between two worlds, the billionaire in designer clothes and the combat pilot whose innovations were now threatening global stability. The scar above her eyebrow seemed more visible under the harsh fluorescent lighting, a reminder that she'd already paid prices that money couldn't reimburse. She thought about the other passengers on the Gulf Stream, probably still arguing about delays and missed appointments, blissfully unaware that their biggest concern was whether the bar service would continue during their extended ground time. "Colonel," she said, straightening her shoulders with military precision, "let's find out who stole my technology and used it to start a war." The Situation Room fell silent when she entered, conversation stopping mid-sentence as officers turned to assess the civilian in expensive clothes who'd somehow gained access to one of the most secure facilities in the American Southwest. The main display showed a real-time map of the Pacific, with carrier groups marked in different colors and threat assessments updating every few seconds. Red zones indicated areas where conventional forces couldn't operate safely. The amount of red was growing. General Harrison, whose stars indicated he'd reached the pinnacle of Air Force leadership, looked up from a secure communication terminal with the expression of someone accustomed to making decisions that affected thousands of lives. His gaze took in Viper's civilian appearance with obvious skepticism. "Colonel Patterson, I hope you have an excellent explanation for bringing a contractor into this briefing." "Sir, this is Valentina Kozlova, formerly Captain Kozlova, call sign Viper 6. 93 combat missions, 0 losses, decorated veteran of Operation Enduring Freedom." Patterson's introduction carried weight that made several officers reconsider their initial assessments. More relevant to our current situation, she's the inventor of the stealth detection systems that someone apparently used to eliminate that Chinese fighter. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Viper found herself the focus of attention that felt uncomfortably like targeting systems acquiring a lock. These were people who dealt with threats to national security on a daily basis, and she'd just been identified as someone whose work might have created their current crisis. Admiral Chen, whose presence via secure video link from Pacific Fleet Command carried the authority of someone managing naval operations across half the world's ocean, leaned forward on the screen. "Ms. Kozlova, we need to understand exactly what capabilities your system possesses and who might have had access to the specifications. The Chinese are claiming we used a secret weapon to destroy their aircraft, and they're positioning for retaliation." Viper moved to the central display, her movements carrying the confidence of someone who'd briefed combat missions under similar circumstances. The technology might have changed, but the fundamentals remained the same: identify the threat, assess capabilities, develop countermeasures. "Gentlemen, my detection system was purely theoretical. It uses quantum radar principles to identify stealth aircraft by measuring disturbances in background radiation. The power requirements should make it impossible to deploy outside a fixed installation." She gestured to the satellite imagery showing empty ocean where the J-20 had disappeared. "But if someone solved the power problem, built a miniaturized fusion reactor, or developed superconducting battery technology we don't possess, then they could mount this system on a mobile platform. A submarine, for instance, could surface, acquire targets, and disappear again without leaving conventional signatures." The implications hit the room like a shock wave. General Harrison's expression shifted from skepticism to grim understanding. "You're suggesting someone has built an invisible submarine capable of shooting down stealth fighters." "Not just shooting down," Viper corrected, manipulating the display to show electromagnetic analysis of the incident site. The energy signatures indicate the aircraft was disabled, not destroyed. Whoever did this wanted to capture an intact J-20, along with its pilot and intelligence systems. The room erupted in controlled chaos as officers began calculating threat assessments for an adversary with capabilities that redefined the rules of engagement. Secure phones rang with updates from intelligence agencies, trying to identify which nation possessed the technical capability to weaponize theoretical research. Admiral Chen was already issuing orders to submarine commanders, telling them to begin searching for something that might not be detectable by conventional means. Colonel Patterson moved beside Viper as she continued analyzing the data, his voice low enough to avoid the general conversation. "Ma'am, I need to ask, when you developed this system, did you build in any backdoors or vulnerabilities that we could exploit?" She paused in her analysis, considering the question that every weapons designer eventually faced. "Colonel, I designed the detection system to be undefeatable because I assumed we'd be the ones using it. But every system has weaknesses." She highlighted specific frequency ranges on the display. "The quantum radar requires perfect calibration. If someone could generate precisely timed electromagnetic pulses at these frequencies, it would create blind spots in the detection grid." "How long would those blind spots last?" 43 seconds, long enough for a fast aircraft to penetrate the detection envelope and engage the platform directly. She met his gaze with the steady confidence of someone who'd calculated similar problems under enemy fire. But it would require someone with intimate knowledge of the system's specifications and the ability to generate pulses accurate to microsecond timing. General Harrison's voice cut through the tactical discussions filling the room. "Ms. Kozlova, can you generate those electromagnetic pulses?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Every person in the room understood what he was really asking. Could she create a weapon to destroy the weapon that her own research had made possible? The moral complexity of the situation wasn't lost on anyone present. She'd left the military to avoid exactly these kinds of decisions, but circumstances had dragged her back into a world where theoretical knowledge became tools for killing people. Viper looked around the room at faces she recognized from news briefings and congressional hearings, people whose decisions shaped American foreign policy and military doctrine. They were waiting for her answer to a question that might determine whether the next few days brought diplomatic resolution or global conflict. The satellite displays continued updating, showing Chinese naval forces moving into attack formations, while American carriers adjusted their positions in response. Somewhere in the Pacific, submarines from multiple nations were beginning to hunt for something that might not exist according to conventional wisdom, but was rapidly becoming the most dangerous threat in the world's oceans. Her decision would affect all of them. "General," she said finally, "I can create the pulse system, but I'll need access to military-grade electronics and a platform capable of getting close enough to use it. We're talking about engaging an invisible enemy that's already demonstrated it can eliminate our most advanced aircraft without warning." Harrison nodded grimly. "Colonel Patterson, escort Ms. Kozlova to the secure laboratory facility. Give her whatever resources she requires." He turned back to the displays showing global tensions escalating in real time. "And remind everyone involved that this briefing never happened. As far as official records show, we're dealing with equipment malfunctions and communication errors." The weight of unofficial operations settled on the room like fog rolling in from the ocean. These were the missions that didn't appear in after-action reports, the decisions made by people who understood that sometimes protecting national security required operating outside traditional channels. Viper had participated in similar operations during her active duty, but never as the person whose technology had created the crisis, requiring extra-legal solutions. As Patterson led her toward the laboratory facility, she caught a glimpse of her reflection in a darkened window. The woman looking back at her wore expensive clothes and carried herself with the confidence that came from building a business empire. But her eyes held the focused intensity of someone calculating engagement parameters and survival probabilities. The transformation was subtle but unmistakable. Viper 6 was emerging from beneath the corporate executive's carefully constructed facade. The laboratory hummed with the quiet efficiency of advanced research conducted under time pressure that measured consequences in potential body counts, rather than quarterly profits. Banks of computers processed calculations that would have taken months using civilian equipment, their displays showing waveform analysis and electromagnetic modeling that transformed theoretical concepts into practical weapons systems. Technicians moved with the focused precision of people who understood that their work might determine whether diplomacy or warfare resolved the current crisis. Viper shed her suit jacket and rolled up her sleeves, revealing forearms marked with small scars that told stories of close encounters with unfriendly aircraft and emergency ejections over hostile territory. The scars were nearly invisible under normal circumstances, but the laboratory's harsh lighting made them stand out like military decorations worn on civilian skin. She tried to leave that part of her life behind, but her body still carried the evidence of choices made under extreme circumstances. "Ma'am, we've prepared Workstation 7 with the specifications you requested." The technician, a young sergeant whose name tape read Martinez, gestured toward a setup that would have impressed researchers at MIT or Stanford. "The electromagnetic pulse generators are rated for the frequencies you specified, and we've included targeting systems that can maintain microsecond accuracy under combat conditions." The equipment brought back memories of weapons testing conducted at facilities like this, where theoretical concepts became tools that pilots like her would eventually use to stay alive in contested airspace. The difference now was that she was designing countermeasures for her own innovations, creating weapons to destroy technology that existed because of her research. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd become wealthy by commercializing military applications, only to be summoned back to neutralize the same technologies in hostile hands. Colonel Patterson reviewed technical specifications while she worked, his questions revealing a solid understanding of both the strategic implications and tactical requirements of the mission they were planning. "Ms. Kozlova, assuming you can create a viable pulse weapon, how do we deliver it? The target has demonstrated it can eliminate aircraft before they can respond. Surface ships would be even more vulnerable." She paused in her calculations, considering options that all carried unacceptable risks. The pulse system needs to be deployed within 50 nautical miles of the target to ensure effectiveness. Any platform carrying it will be exposed to retaliation for approximately 2 minutes while the pulses cycle through the necessary frequencies. She met his gaze directly. "Colonel, this isn't a mission that anyone comes back from using conventional tactics." The laboratory fell silent except for the humming of computer systems, processing electromagnetic models that might determine the fate of Pacific Fleet operations. Martinez continued assembling pulse generators with the steady competence of someone accustomed to building weapons under deadline pressure, but his expression suggested he understood the implications of what he was creating. These weren't defensive systems designed to protect American forces. They were offensive weapons designed to eliminate a threat by destroying it completely. There might be another option. Viper pulled up satellite imagery of the Western Pacific, overlaying it with oceanographic data that showed current patterns and thermal layers. If the hostile platform is submarine-based, it has to surface periodically for communications and target acquisition. We could position assets at likely surfacing points and wait for it to reveal itself. Patterson studied the data with the expression of someone calculating odds that involved American lives. That assumes we can predict its operating pattern based on limited intelligence. If we guess wrong, more aircraft disappear and China interprets our naval movements as preparation for first strike operations. The strategic complexity was staggering. Every decision carried cascading consequences that could escalate tensions throughout the Pacific region. Moving American forces into position to hunt an invisible enemy would be interpreted as aggressive maneuvering by Chinese commanders who were already convinced that the United States had used a secret weapon against their aircraft. But allowing the hostile platform to continue operations would give it opportunities to eliminate more targets and potentially trigger the very conflict everyone was trying to avoid. General Harrison to Laboratory 7. The intercom crackled to life, carrying the authority of someone accustomed to making decisions that affected global stability. Ms. Kozlova, we've received intelligence that changes the tactical picture. The hostile platform has been identified through electronic signature analysis. It's not Chinese, Russian, or North Korean. The implications hit the room like a physical blow. If the invisible submarine wasn't operated by a recognized military force, then its presence in contested waters represented something far more dangerous than conventional state-sponsored aggression. Non-state actors with advanced military technology could operate without the diplomatic constraints that prevented established nations from escalating conflicts beyond acceptable limits. Viper felt the familiar tightening in her chest that had always preceded her most dangerous missions. The rules of engagement had just changed in ways that made conventional military planning inadequate. General, do we have any identification of the platform's origin or sponsorship? Negative. Electronic signatures suggest hybrid technology, American stealth systems, Chinese manufacturing, and European navigation equipment. Someone assembled capabilities from multiple sources to create something that doesn't officially exist in any nation's inventory. The revelation transformed their tactical problem into something approaching a nightmare scenario. Hunting an invisible enemy was difficult enough when that enemy represented a known military force operating under established command structures and diplomatic oversight. Engaging an unknown entity with unclear objectives and unlimited rules of engagement meant that any response could trigger consequences that no one could predict or control. Martinez looked up from his pulse generator assembly with the expression of someone who just realized that his technical expertise was contributing to a mission that might determine whether the Pacific region remained stable or descended into chaotic warfare. Ma'am, if this platform is operating independently, how do we know it won't simply disappear when we locate it? There's no political pressure we can apply and no diplomatic channels we can use. The question highlighted the fundamental challenge of asymmetric warfare conducted by actors who existed outside traditional international systems. Terrorist organizations had demonstrated the difficulty of applying conventional military pressure against enemies who didn't control territory or maintain infrastructure that could be targeted for retaliation. An invisible submarine operated by unknown entities represented an escalation of that same principle: unlimited capability without identifiable vulnerabilities. We make it too expensive for them to continue operations. Viper's voice carried the cold calculation of someone who'd engaged similar problems from the cockpit of an F-16 over Afghanistan. The platform has to surface for communications and resupply. It has to return to a base facility for maintenance and crew rotation. Most importantly, it's carrying technology that required significant investment to develop and deploy. She manipulated the display to show shipping patterns and communication intercepts from across the Pacific region. Someone funded this operation, and that funding creates a trail we can follow. The electromagnetic pulse weapon gives us a tactical solution, but the strategic answer is identifying who built this platform and why they're using it to destabilize the Pacific. Patterson nodded slowly, understanding dawning in his expression. We're not just hunting a submarine. We're tracking a conspiracy that has access to classified American research and the resources to weaponize it without any government knowing about the operation. The mission parameters had just expanded beyond tactical engagement to encompass counterintelligence operations that would require cooperation between military forces and intelligence agencies from multiple nations. The hostile platform wasn't just a threat to American aircraft. It represented an unknown entity capable of triggering conflicts between established military powers by using their own technology against them. General Harrison's voice returned through the intercom, carrying the weight of someone who just received intelligence that complicated an already impossible situation. "Ms. Kozlova, Colonel Patterson, report to Briefing Room Alpha immediately. We have a development that changes everything we thought we knew about this situation." The brief walk through corridors filled with personnel managing crisis operations felt like crossing a battlefield where the enemy's positions remained unknown, but their capabilities had been dramatically demonstrated. Officers moved with the focused urgency of people implementing contingency plans that had been theoretical until 18 hours ago, when an invisible enemy had proved that conventional assumptions about military technology were no longer valid. Briefing Room Alpha contained displays that made the previous Situation Room look primitive by comparison. Real-time satellite feeds showed naval movements across the entire Pacific Basin, with American, Chinese, Russian, and Japanese forces all adjusting their positions in response to a threat that none of them fully understood. Intelligence summaries updated continuously as agencies around the world shared information about an enemy that appeared to possess capabilities that violated the known laws of physics and international relations. General Harrison stood before a main display that showed the electromagnetic signature analysis of the hostile platform, but the data had been enhanced with additional intelligence that transformed their understanding of what they were facing. "Ladies and gentlemen, the invisible submarine that destroyed the Chinese J-20 is not operating alone. Satellite reconnaissance has identified at least 3 similar platforms operating in different regions of the Pacific." The revelation hit the room like a shock wave. Viper found herself staring at evidence that someone had not only weaponized her theoretical research, but had done so on a scale that suggested industrial-level production capabilities. The implications extended far beyond a single rogue operation. They were facing an enemy with resources that approached or exceeded those of established military powers. "Sir, do we have any indication of their intended targets?" Colonel Patterson's question reflected the concerns of everyone present. 3 invisible submarines could eliminate dozens of aircraft, disrupt shipping lanes throughout the Pacific, and trigger conflicts between nations that would blame each other for attacks carried out by unknown entities. Admiral Chen's voice carried strain through the secure video link from Pacific Fleet Command. "All 3 platforms are positioning near major shipping routes and strategic choke points. If they're planning to attack civilian vessels, the economic consequences would be catastrophic. Insurance rates for Pacific shipping would become prohibitive, and supply chains connecting Asia to North America would collapse." The strategic picture was becoming clear, and it was worse than anyone had imagined. The hostile platforms weren't positioned to target military assets. They were preparing to attack the economic infrastructure that connected the world's largest economies. The destruction of civilian shipping would trigger financial panic that would make military retaliation seem like a secondary concern compared to preventing global economic collapse. Viper studied the positioning data with growing horror. "General, these platforms aren't trying to start a war between established military powers. They're positioning to collapse the global economy by making Pacific shipping impossible." She highlighted the tactical positions on the display. Every major shipping route between Asia and North America passes within range of at least one platform. They could eliminate enough civilian vessels to shut down international trade for months. The room fell silent as everyone present calculated the consequences of economic warfare conducted on a scale that no nation had previously contemplated. Military conflicts had economic consequences, But this represented the inverse: economic attacks that would force military responses from countries trying to protect their vital interests. The resulting chaos would destabilize international relations in ways that conventional warfare could never achieve. General Harrison's expression carried the weight of someone contemplating scenarios that existed outside established military doctrine. Ms. Kozlova, can your pulse weapon system be modified to target multiple platforms simultaneously? Not with the current design specifications, she replied, already running calculations that might provide alternative solutions. But if we can identify the communication frequencies the platforms use to coordinate their operations, we might be able to disrupt their command and control systems, force them to operate independently instead of as a coordinated fleet. The tactical implications were significant. 3 invisible submarines operating independently would still represent a serious threat to Pacific shipping, but they would be vulnerable to the kind of systematic hunting that naval forces excelled at conducting. Coordinated platforms with shared intelligence and tactical planning represented an entirely different level of threat, one that conventional military doctrine wasn't designed to address. Colonel Patterson was already coordinating with intelligence specialists, directing them to analyze communication intercepts for patterns that might reveal how the hostile platforms shared information and received operational orders. Ma'am, if we can disrupt their communications, how long would it take for the platforms to reestablish contact with their command structure? Viper considered the question while reviewing technical specifications for submarine communication systems that operated under conditions requiring absolute secrecy. Depending on their protocols, anywhere from 6 hours to 3 days. But once they realize they've lost contact, they'll assume they're under attack and implement emergency procedures. What kind of emergency procedures? The kind designed to complete their mission before we can stop them. The briefing room erupted in controlled activity as officers began implementing plans that had never been tested against an enemy with capabilities that didn't officially exist. Satellite tracking systems, normally used to monitor known submarine fleets, were recalibrated to search for electromagnetic anomalies that might indicate invisible platforms moving through ocean areas that conventional wisdom considered empty. Intelligence agencies shared classified research data that might provide insights into technology that someone had weaponized without any government's authorization or knowledge. Admiral Chen coordinated fleet movements that positioned American naval forces to respond to threats that might materialize anywhere across millions of square miles of ocean. Chinese, Japanese, and South Korean naval commanders received encrypted communications explaining that the aircraft elimination had been conducted by unknown entities, not American forces, but convincing them would require evidence that didn't yet exist. The diplomatic complexity was staggering. Every nation with interests in Pacific shipping needed to be warned about the threat without revealing the extent of American knowledge about advanced stealth technology. Military forces had to be coordinated without appearing to form alliances that could be misinterpreted as preparation for aggressive action. Most critically, economic markets had to be protected from panic, while governments prepared for attacks that could destabilize the global financial system. Viper found herself at the center of planning that extended far beyond her expertise in electromagnetic weapons systems. Her theoretical research had become the foundation for understanding an enemy that threatened not just military targets, but the economic infrastructure that connected continents. The weight of responsibility was crushing. Her innovations had made this crisis possible, and now her knowledge might be the only thing that could resolve it. Ms. Kozlova, General Harrison's voice cut through the tactical discussions filling the room. I need your honest assessment. Can we stop these platforms before they complete whatever operation they're planning? She looked around the room at faces that represented the pinnacle of American military leadership, people whose decisions affected the lives of soldiers and sailors around the world. The question they were asking her required an answer based not on corporate projections or theoretical models, but on the kind of practical knowledge that came from flying combat missions, where failure meant death and success meant living to fight another day. "General," she said, her voice carrying the steady confidence of someone who'd faced impossible odds before, "we can stop them. But it's going to require taking risks that peacetime military doctrine doesn't contemplate and using tactics that will probably violate several international treaties." The admission hung in the air like cordite smoke from a fired weapon. Everyone present understood that she just described the kind of operation that existed in the gray areas of international law, conducted by people who understood that preventing global catastrophe sometimes required making choices that couldn't be explained to congressional oversight committees or international tribunals. Harrison nodded grimly. "Colonel Patterson, escort Ms. Kozlova to the secure communications facility. She has a weapons system to build and about 8 hours to make it work. The rest of us have a war to prevent." The secure communications facility buzzed with activity that felt familiar to Viper despite the years she'd spent in corporate boardrooms instead of military command centers. Technicians monitored satellite feeds that tracked naval movements across the Pacific, while intelligence analysts processed intercepts that might reveal the location and intentions of an enemy that operated outside established international systems. The controlled chaos reminded her of pre-mission briefings, where every detail mattered because lives depended on getting the tactical picture exactly right. Her workstation dominated one corner of the facility, surrounded by electromagnetic pulse generators that represented the theoretical concepts she developed transformed into practical weapons, capable of disabling the most advanced stealth technology in the world. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was using American military resources to destroy weapons systems based on her own research, creating countermeasures for innovations that had made her wealthy enough to retire from.